Hello, and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different mediums books, movies, games, you name it. The only rule is that we can only talk about these things in terms of the writing. Anything like acting, animation, art, etc., is off limits unless it relates directly to how the story is being told. I'm Daniel Radford, author, hide and seek world champion, and also your host. And today I'm joined once more by John Kernan as we continue our cycle on ghost stories.
Hey there, I'm not that good at hide and seek, but I am ready.
As I mentioned in the previous episode, today we're going to be taking a look at the anime series AnoHana, The Flower We Saw That Day, which is somehow a shorter title than the actual Japanese name of the show or its direct translation. I kid you not, the direct translation is actually, we still don't know the name of the flower we saw that day. And the Japanese version is not much shorter. Because why use just a few words when you can use 50?
You know what? Honestly, I feel like the English title could really use that couple extra words because we still don't remember. It makes a lot more sense than just the flower we saw that day. Because it's not like the flower comes up a lot.
Or pretty much ever, actually.
Right at the end, baby. Let's go. Justify the title only at the last second, which kind of doesn't justify it at all by
And it's
proxy.
arguably not even really a flower, it's more of a metaphor.
The flower was a metaphor the whole time.
But yeah, so there's a reason that just about everyone just calls it Anohana, and that is what we also will be calling it, because if we used the full title every time, we would be it would be 3 hours of the title.
You gotta love how many anime that applies to, where it's like, well, yeah, well, there's a one-word title everyone calls it. That's only part of it, though. The name's actually a sentence, but,
Yeah, I
nobody
don't
wants
know,
to
man.
say that every time, so
Anyway, we digress.
ReZero will always be one of the big ones.
Yeah. So I touched on this briefly during the last episode as well because Eva asked me about my favorite ghost story, and I was like, "Well, funny you mention that. Funny you ask." But basically, the story of Anohana is as follows: this reclusive shut-in named Jinta spends all his time gaming. He skips school. He avoids all forms of social interaction. And then one day, the ghost of his dead childhood friend, Maiko, who generally goes by Menma, there's a lot of that nickname switching in and out that's probably going to become a nuisance in this podcast. I'm sorry. But
You
she
know what?
appears
We're
to
just gonna
him.
have to deal. It's a group of
Yeah.
6 little kids who were best friends. What are you gonna do? They all got names, nicknames, and sometimes also they're flopping between names, nicknames, and family names, depending on their current relationship at that exact moment.
Yeah, which is great, and we're gonna get into that. But yes, so she appears to him and is like, "Hey, it's me. Hi. I need you to grant this wish of mine." And he's like, "Okay, I'm delusional."
Oh, I get it. I'm so depressed and I'm so upset about school and stuff that I'm having a specialized summer hallucination, like manifestation of my guilt and my bad feelings or whatever. The little guy thinks he's in Silent Hill.
Uh, he is not, in fact, in Silent Hill, though. This is actually the ghost of Menma, and she does indeed want him to fulfill a wish of hers. It seems. Unfortunately, she cannot remember what that wish is, and this whole weird situation spirals into this whole mess where, as a result, all their their old friend group, Jinta and Menma's old friend group, who have since drifted apart, find themselves interacting for the first time in like what is it, 2, 3, 4 years? I'm not entirely sure.
Something
And a
like that.
kind
They
of
didn't all immediately separate, like, right away when the
yeah,
thing happened, but it happened relatively fast, so it's been a while.
and they are forced to sort of all confront their various pain and grief and guilt, those feelings that pushed them apart in the first place in the wake of Menma's death. And as I said, it's a beautiful piece of media and is not only my favorite ghost story, but probably one of my favorite stories in general. And I'm very excited to get into it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's not super clear right away, although once you have seen everyone a little bit, it gets a little obvious. Um, Someone dying, especially someone close, is always a big deal, especially for any group that person is a core part of. Thanks, dyslexia. But um, but Menma wasn't just a member of the group; she was the heart and soul of it.
Yeah. She was that person who didn't seem to be the heart and soul of the group. That was because Jinta was their sort of default leader figure when they were kids. But so many of the group dynamics revolved around her. So when she was suddenly abruptly when she died abruptly in this accident, she like fell down like a really steep hill and crashed into a river and just drifted away and died basically. Uh when that happened to her, all of those complicated feelings that were largely built around how people's relationships with her stood became twisted and morphed into these really unpleasant feelings that none of them could properly deal with, and that inevitably led to this schism where they all drifted apart. And there's so many reasons why I think that this show does a really good job of portraying that process and just of representing the way grief feels.
Yeah, and like I I also love the shared experience of everybody had completely different reasons they couldn't feel the same afterwards. Everybody had completely different reasons that they were well, everybody had different things they were going through. I'm not gonna say everybody had different reasons they were heartbroken over her death, because even the ones who thought they had more selfish reasons for being upset about her being gone really did also love her and miss her. They all did. But, like, I love the shared experience. Oh, no. Oh, short-term memory. I went on too long. They all did really just love her and miss her, but, like, it's also very clear that, those feelings that were festering and building up, they were definitely all gonna explode and lead to some stuff at some point. But what happened as a result of her dying is actually so much worse because those feelings were left with nowhere to go. Even the ones that weren't directed at her were closely related to her enough that they couldn't travel down their path to actually being expressed and processed and learned from with her gone. And so, oh, right. I love the shared experience that every single person important to this story, other than Jinta's dad, love the guy, he's great, has no flaws, um, is stuck in time. Every single one of them, although it's for a different reason, is still stuck in time from the day she died, all the way from every single member of the group, including herself, literally, despite the fact that she looks older.
This is something that another reason I really wanted to do this particular show, right? Because another thing I touched on when I was talking to Eva for the last episode was we very unintentionally, it wasn't like in our notes, but we stumbled across this like realization that there's a really direct correlation between like ghosts conceptually and memory, which now that I say it, and when I said it, it seems obvious, but you don't really think about it. But ghosts are often in media and in storytelling are literal manifestations of past events that characters just cannot move past. And characters in a tragic ghost story like Anohana are frequently haunted both literally and metaphorically by that ghost and what that ghost represents. And that is so well represented in this story because this which is an exploration of grief and the different ways it manifests and how it affects us and how and just of the process of moving on from a loss. all these characters have tried to change themselves, in various ways. In various ways, they are actively rejecting that time, but but as they start interacting again, the more they realize they haven't moved on and changed nearly as much as they think they have. And they're still carrying all that same baggage. So while they're simultaneously rejecting the past whilst being completely strangled by it. And that's one of the things about Menma looking older that's actually really cool, is because even though she died looking younger and seems to have aged somehow, the reason metaphorically that that is the case is because the character's grief has grown and morphed with them, but has never gone away, and she is the physical manifestation of that grief. It's very cool.
You could even almost say that they've all been haunted by her ghost actually this whole time, and the one we see is really almost like a breath of fresh air here to chase away those memories that are just memories and give them the real thing back. She's almost like their collective true memory of who she really was, the one that they loved, not the one that's been stuck in their heads this whole time.
Also very true. And like there is also the alternative interpretation, right? Where the reason she looks older is because she's now representative of time starting to move again.
Yeah, it's it's time for them all to wake up.
Yeah, I think both interpretations are valid and possibly equally true even. But it's one of those little details that like you don't think about and then you realize and you go, "Oh, that's actually really smart. I wish I thought of that."
Yeah, this show's really smart.
Apart from some things, but we'll get into that too, I think.
Hey, listen, it's teenagers. What are you gonna do? Look at them. They're all dumb. Even the smart ones that go to the fancy school, they're just a different kind of dumb. That guy's wearing a dress. He doesn't even look good in a dress.
Yeah, I mean, that's as good as a transition as any to say, hey, maybe we should actually talk about the characters a little more specifically and sort of run down the list so we can give our audience a grasp of who these characters are, how they've been affected, and how they fit into the story.
I'm really glad all these characters' names get repeated so much, or I never would have actually remembered them all.
I mean, which names?
All of them,
Yeah.
Yukiatsu, Anjo, Papo, Tsurumi, Jintan.
On that, yeah. Well, speaking of Jinta, so as we established earlier on, he after Menma's death became a shut-in. He has like really severe anxiety and agoraphobia regarding the outside world. He basically has completely rejected the world outside the safety and comfort of his home. The the world that has changed without him, and the world that no longer has Menma in it. And he kind of also hates himself because of it, because of his guilt over the events that happened there, but that led to the accident, but also just because of who he has become. Because who he has become is basically the exact opposite of the confident, gifted, charismatic leader figure he used to be as a child.
I just had a revelation that I can't believe I didn't think of. I mean, I thought of it a little bit, but not in relation to the early part of the story.
So
While everybody was kind of like justifiably annoyed by his reaction to the whole thing, but also how come everybody was only thinking about how much pain he's in and how broken up he is over Menma? And why did none of his friends address the fact that each of them just lost a friend and he one right after the other practically lost her and his mom?
well, I mean, that was also a part of it.
Like, no wonder he reacted even worse than everybody else did.
Yeah, I think there was at least a yearish, maybe even 2 between the events. It's not entirely clear, but yeah, he has also before he lost Menma, he also lost his mother to some sort of illness, like cancer or something. So he's not got a great relationship with the idea of change and death, and he wasn't never good at like dealing with his negative emotions and things like that. So that's sort of crystallized into him becoming this shut in and developing this anxiety and this agoraphobia. He just
Yeah.
he cannot deal with the world outside of his safe little space in his home, because it is a world that has not just changed and left him behind, but it is a world that he has betrayed him and taken the two most precious people to him away.
And in retrospect, it seems like that was actually always kind of a part of him. Those events just really woke up and brought out the worst of it. I kind of feel like part of why he became the leader in the first place was that fear was leading him to always run forward, never look back, never stop and think about anything and just go and do things, which led to him always leading everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. It's definitely a possibility. It's you definitely do get people who just plow on ahead and just don't acknowledge the bad things, and that gives them gives the impression of them being very brave and bold and charismatic and confident. When in reality, what they're doing is just fleeing their negativity.
Yeah, and it's really easy to only show the positive side of that when you're a kid.
Yeah, and I think it's not a bad interpretation of the character at all to say that this part, this more frightened part of him was always there, and you could see it in the fact that he didn't process negative emotions. He just kept on. He would always either run away or just plow ahead rather than deal with his shit.
Yeah, look how poorly he handled the whole little, confession at the base.
Or talking to his mother in the hospital.
Oh,
His
man.
interact like,
That
his
made me
default
sad.
reaction to negativity and sadness has always been to reject it and run away instead of processing it.
Poor Jinta.
But so that's him, and then as the story goes like, but, Menma appears to him and he agrees, he's gonna help her fulfill this wish, but the thing is, as the story goes on, it becomes progressively clearer as well that he's not really trying that hard to grant that wish because he's still that same person. He doesn't want to say goodbye. He doesn't want to see her move on and leave him behind all over again.
He just also can't say no to her.
Yeah, he just can't say no. But he's been the thing is as well, her being there has been good for him. He's talking to people again. He's getting out of his shell more. He's getting some of that some real confidence back.
He made him try going to school.
Yeah, and he did it because he can't say no to her.
He only did it for a day at first, but then he goes back a little bit later, and at least, he starts working after that instead of going to school, but at least you feel like it's not because he's running away from school, it's because he's obsessed with the things he gets out of a job at that moment.
Yeah, it's it's interesting watching him because he really struggles with this because he wants to do what's right by Menma and fulfill this wish of hers, but by the same token, not only is he in a much better place mentally because she's there in some ways, but he's also going through the idea all over again that he could lose her all over again, and that is agonizing for him. So he doesn't try that hard at first to help her move on. He's kinda just going through the motions,
Trying to make her happy without actually granting her wish.
and that is something he struggles with throughout the entire rest of the series because he can't let go. It's really, really hard for him to overcome that and say that last goodbye in the end, and damn does that humanize him.
Yeah, I'm really, really glad they get into his head because I think that moment there too is like a thing maybe not all of us have been through, but I feel like everybody goes through at least once or twice of doing something that is right and has to be done, but the whole time you're doing it, you are just thinking different variations of how you don't wanna do it, just telling yourself, "I could stop this at any moment. I could just not do it. Why don't I just quit right now?" As your body continues to go through the motions and locks in anyways, just raging in your own head about how you don't want it and things could be
I mean,
different.
that's one of the saddest things about him too, though, is that he thinks he's a terrible person because he's feeling these things, but at the same time, he's a good person because he's still going through with it, even though he doesn't want to.
And minutes later, we find out everybody who was there was going through it at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. But, going down the list, I actually Popo's next on my list, but I actually wanna save him for last, so we're gonna scroll further down.
Bye, Popo. We'll see you later. You're gonna be last, just like always.
I mean, there's a reason.
I know, but also he always was.
Yeah, true. So
But when he said that moment, like, sorry, I know we're getting to him later, but just the line in that moment of like, yeah, I was always just kind of a follower. Sometimes I wouldn't even join in. I would just stand and watch. And I was like, oh,
oh, no.
ow.
Yeah. But, going down the list, next we've got, Naruko, who is often called Anaru, uh, and she was kind of meek as a little kid. She was the sort of shy, self-conscious one with the, frizzy hair and big glasses, and,
Kids get bullied for curly hair in Japan.
apparently, I didn't know this, but, I believe you.
It's okay, Anjo. We both stand behind you. We got your back.
We salute you as 2 people with ridiculous, frizzy, thick, curly hair.
As soon as I saw child Anjo, I went, "Oh my god, that was my hair. That was my hair when I was younger." Ah.
Uh, Audience, you don't know what we look like, but I've made this joke before. Legitimately, Seffi or well, you're not Seffi here, you're John here. Uh, but yeah, basically, you pick whichever one of us you want, but the other one just looks like the other's Echo Fighter.
Yeah, yeah, like, if it's left alone, our hair is really
It's
similar.
ridiculous. But yeah, so Naruko was sort of the meek, geeky girl basically, and her version of rejecting all of that has been to try and dramatically reinvent herself. She changes her look, she tries to change her interest, she throws away or like she throws away like a lot of her old identity, hides all like stashes all her old nerdy interests and boxes away, and becomes kind of mean towards her old friends, a little hostile, even starts hanging around with some even not great to her mom at that, but that's typical teenage girl shit, teenage boy shit too, to be
Hanging around
honest.
with a couple of mean stereotypical
Yeah,
gyarus.
but all of that, like the venom and hostility that she sometimes displays to other people, is really just her venting her own self-loathing. And like that the real version of her is still in there because she still just kind of adapts to try and be who other people want her to be. She still can't really let go of who she was in the past. Like she works at a game store because there's still that part of her in there, even though she stopped playing the games that loves the games. She still owns all of her old stuff.
She pretty much buries her original personality so tightly that for all intents and purposes, she doesn't have a solid identity. Because normally when people try to move on from a past version of themselves, they build a new one. But since, just like everyone else, Anjo is still stuck in time, she buried the old personality, but she couldn't even construct a new one. So all she became is a floater who just changes her attitude and how she acts to wherever she currently is. She became a chameleon.
Yeah.
Which kinda hurt my soul a little bit to see that as that actually used to be who I was when I was younger. I didn't really have much going on. I had a couple things that I liked and did when I was by myself, but I kinda just did that very small selection of things all the time, and then just became whoever I needed to be to get along with everyone around me wherever I was at any given time.
For a show about a ghost, the emotional beats in this in Anohana are real. That like they're real,
They're so real,
and
sometimes too real.
yeah, but the thing as well with her is that the more she like floats back into this interactions because of the Menma situation, despite the fact that only Jinta can see Menma as a side note. She gets drawn because, he's trying to help Menma with his wish, and Popo gets involved, and suddenly she's been roped into it as well. More and more of who she really is and all those old feelings that she buried start bubbling back up to the surface, and what not I don't wanna say violently because she isn't gonna go out, like, punching anyone, but it's not it's explosive, it all happens at once, and suddenly she's like, "Oh, shit, I'm, like, feeling all the old feelings down to, like, redeveloping a crush on Jinta all over again," and
They
also
never went anywhere.
yeah, and also because of this whole situation with him still even though she's dead and he's trying to help her pass on, being completely devoted to Menma, that, like, toxic jealousy is also coming back, and she's just going, "Oh, shit. Oh, no."
Yeah, you know you're having a rough time when the first thought that bubbles to the surface about someone you love and miss is, "Wow, even when she's dead, it's all about her."
Yeah, and that is not good for Naruko because she's like, because she knows that that's not a good thing to be feeling, and she just feels horribly guilty about it, which is not great because she already felt incredibly guilty for being like somewhat responsible for the chain of events that led to the accident where Memma died in the first place.
Yeah, unironically, like, the perfect portrayal of intrusive thoughts. Having something you don't wanna think that you know is bad and makes you feel bad and you logically, mentally disagree with still popping into your head anyways, whether you like it or not. And then the awful feeling of, "Wow, I actually had that thought, didn't I?"
Yeah, sidebar. Basically, the chain of events that led to the accident that we keep talking about in a very, very abridged version of this is basically Menma gathered them all at their like little secret clubhouse they had for a meeting to discuss some stuff she wanted to talk about. And Naruko, during that time, basically goes, "Hey, Jinta, you got a thing for Menma, huh?" And because he was a what young like what 10-year-old boy maybe, uh,
Might have even been, like, 8.
yeah,
They were pretty young.
he obviously was incredibly embarrassed, couldn't handle that at all. Was like it was not great. So he reflexively said some fairly nasty things about Menma, which he didn't believe, and he stopped himself. He realized he was saying it, and then defaulted back to his
And it's what you always expect a little
yeah,
boy to say when told they like a little girl, like, "What? No, I don't like her, she's
yeah.
ugly. What do you
And
mean?"
he freezes. He sees that like sad smile on Menma's face, and it just breaks him.
Which hurts so much more than if she had started crying.
Yeah. And he does what he always does when he has confronted with negativity. He can't handle it, and he runs away, and she chases after him, and Yukiatsu chases after her. It's a whole mess, but somewhere in there, they get separated, and she trips, falls down the cliff, and dies, uh, just to catch you back up. So that's why Naruko is feeling so guilty, is because she blames herself for initiating that entire interaction in the first place, which isn't fair on herself. She could not possibly have known that it would end that way
Especially when we notice in the flashbacks that, that girl was putting herself in danger of falling all the
all the
time.
time.
She's constantly standing on the edges of bridges and balconies and stuff and balancing on little ledges on one foot, and, like
No
and I
regard
don't
for
mean
her
as a
own well
ghost, I
being.
mean in flashbacks when she was younger. It's like, I don't this is a horrible thing to say, but it's objectively true. This could have happened at any time. It sucks that it
It
did,
just
but
happened to be
wow.
the worst time. But yeah, so that's where Naruko is at. She is not in a good place. She's already guilty. All this guilt is bubbling back up, and then the jealousy's coming back, which is making her feel guilty again. And it's just creating this negative feedback loop where she cannot handle any of the emotions at all. But hey, she's not the only one. Let's talk about Atsumu slash Atsuhiko. because for some reason the longer one of those is his nickname. Uh, I don't I don't mean this to be as a slight upon Japanese language or culture. I just don't understand how so many of the nicknames in their language are longer than. But I suppose that sometimes happens in English too.
Oh, right, I forgot, I watched the dub, we might be differing on some of the names a little bit,
Possibly. Uh,
because in English, they were calling him Yatsumi? Yatsumi Atsuhiko?
yeah, Atsuhiko is his nickname, and Atsumu is his first name. I think it might be
Oh
his
god.
surname.
I can't I c that's right, I almost thought he didn't have
We'll just go
a
with Atsuhiko
nickname.
because it's the one name that seems to be the same across both.
Yeah.
So, uh, he's not doing great either.
He seems like he is, 'cause he's the successful little preppy
Yeah.
boy, but, spoiler alert, he's got a wig of her hair in his closet.
Yeah. So he, for one thing, has become kind of more and more deeply obsessed with Menma after her death because, of course, he had unrequited feelings for her, which he had no chance. It was never going to happen, and he knew it.
And he also separately from that, and compounding on that, had an inferiority complex towards Jinta
Which
as
this
well.
only contributed to more because we all know that those two had definitely had a thing for each other. And yeah, so he's got this. He has just become more and more obsessed with the idea of Menma to the point where he is out of for no reason. Like nothing wrong with cross dressing or any of that stuff. That's a completely normal, healthy way to express your identity. But that's not the identity. He's not expressing his identity. He is just trying to have a physical embodiment of this girl, and he's trying to be that embodiment, so there is a version of her that still exists in the world. It's not healthy.
Yeah, it would be fine if the dude wanted to cross-dress and was dressing up as a girl instead of dressing up as the girl who died that he's in love with and obsessed with.
Yeah.
These 2 things are not the same.
So he's got that whole obsession thing going on, and then on top of that, he blames Jinta for her death because his rejection of her led to in his mind led to that entire situation.
And because he's running away from the fact that he actually also kinda blames himself because, another spoiler alert, since we have so much to say about each character, he's the one who put Anjo up to confessing. He practically forced her into it because he wouldn't let go of the idea that it had to be done.
Yep. And so now you've got him with this obsession and going on, and basically like Naruko, he is also rejecting he is actively trying to reject his old self. The old self who was, second fiddle to Ginger all the time. Basically, he now basically defines himself entirely in opposition to who Jinta used to be to the group when they were like little children.
I'm the leader, I'm the smart one, I'm the fit one, I work the hardest, I'm the best, I'm not second fiddle to anybody anymore.
All the girls want him. And the thing is, it's not helping. It's despite
Nope.
making himself who
If
he
anything, it's making it
yeah,
worse.
despite making himself into this desirable person who is better than who Jinta used to be and all that, he still can't get over Menma. He's still becoming spiraling into deeper and deeper obsession. He can't grow, and it's eating him alive. He is not okay.
And yeah, and the fact that he's tried so hard to be the best hasn't helped him at all, not just because he's not moving past it, but because now he's even more jealous and sensitive to the idea of anybody other than him, especially Jinta, getting any, like, positive attention or reinforcement at all. because then it just goes from regular jealousy to what's going on? I'm right here. I'm better than him in every way. How can people still care about him?
And of course, when you add the ghost of Menma back into this equation, a ghost that he cannot see and or interact with or hear, but Jinta can. He was already a ticking time bomb, and the clock has been drastically sped up.
Yeah, somebody snipped the wrong cable.
So he has a very there's a lot of animosity with him towards Jinta that's completely one-sided. Because he just cannot process this and the jealousy and the self-loathing because of course he loathes himself because no matter nothing he does is enough. He's also in a very unhealthy place with a lot of very complicated feelings wrapped up in their old group and in Menma.
Yeah, and then we've got Sarumi being in a weirdly almost she's all in an almost identical situation to him, except that the object of her obsession is still alive and right in front of her and just as out of reach to her as the dead girl.
Yeah, basically because you see her grief is compounded by jealousy as well because she has at some point since the time of Menma's death developed feelings for Atsuhiko.
I think she might have actually already had them back then too,
Maybe it's not
because
super clear.
in that whole confession scene, she kinda kept, like, looking over at him. Because from her confession, it sounds like that's why. Yeah, because she also was related to the whole confession thing because she's the one who went and told Menma about it,
Yeah.
and is why Menma had such a soft reaction to it because she, it was at least partially also just because she thought it was wrong and mean and thought she should know, and she was a little kid, so it was no thinking about the possibility of not saying something, but also really seems like she really wanted to discourage, Atsuhiko and his obsession. It seemed like she was at least a little bit personally mad that he was doing something not just mean, but doing something mean based on the feelings that make her feel bad that she doesn't like.
Well, yeah, and I mean, especially there's gonna be there was always an element of contempt in there, especially as they got older, because she kept herself in check despite feeling all those same things.
Which has her trapped in a weird corner because she has all those feelings while also having so much contempt for how everybody else has fallen into those feelings, especially the guy that she's in love with and jealous over and mad about is right there next to her, not handling it at all.
Yeah, because like she misses Emma just as much as everyone else. She's kept her like little hair clip in a drawer all these years and like wears it while she's drawing her and stuff. But even more than that, she has this intense jealousy toward Menma, who is obviously the girl that Atsuhiko is obsessed with even after her death. But also towards Naruko, who is as once the group starts coming back together, because the person that Atsuhiko basically tries to use to get over uh, Menma, he gravitates towards Naruko because she's going through her own shit with Jinta.
And because we see later that even before Menma's death, jealous of Naruko in general, because she's always been able to completely be herself around the people
Yeah,
she likes, which is ironic considering that becomes exactly what she loses. But, which in an indirect way, not because they actually had a thing, but that led to her always being able to talk to the boy she loved and in a way that she never could because she's always been this reserved, she's always been this cool, and she's never been able to just let loose and be herself.
yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, things are. tragic in a whole different way when you're not jealous of your primary like object of jealousy isn't the girl that your love interest is obsessed with.
It's the one who you assume would be the backup plan.
It's the backup plan, or at least
Just
the assumed backup.
just sitting there going, "You don't understand. At least you're the second fiddle. I'm not even second place." It's like, damn.
But all of that, and she's still, but she's because she is so composed, she's kept a lid on it, and because she has kept a lid on it, it's not only festered, but it's also led to her developing contempt. Simultaneously contempt and love for Atsuhiko because he has not got a hold of his shit whatsoever, and she knows it, and she's
Yeah.
watching him keeps continue to spiral after all this time.
Which, perfectly comes together to almost make it seem like none of that is there at first, because at first it just seems like, wow, the 2 kids who go to the prep school and, like, moved on and are doing so well sure are being fucking mean to
Yeah,
the other ones.
and then as the show goes on, you're realizing like, oh, oh no, they're not okay.
They're not okay at all.
Speaking of people who aren't okay, let's talk about Popo.
Let's talk about Popo, the one who handled Menma's death both the best and the worst at the same time.
Yeah, so he when he reappears and he's the goofy guy basically. He was always the shy kid in the before, like not reserved like Surumi, sh- genuinely shy and quiet.
And the dedicated follower more than anything else, like, he only made it into the group because Jinta grabbed him and dragged him in and was like, "No, you have friends
Yeah,
now."
basically. And like you can tell because he's the only character who isn't a part of their like twisted love dodecahedron.
Yeah. He wasn't crushing on anybody, he was just glad to
Yeah,
be
he was just
involved.
happy to be there. And he doesn't seem to be that different at first. He seems to be coping okay. He's, got this sort of aloof demeanor. But by the same token, if you think about it, the signs are there that he's not doing as well as it seems because he's always traveling. Despite the fact he's a teenager, he has left school, he's working, and he's traveling all the time. He does not stay in one place
And
for
he
very
doesn't
long.
rent a room or have a house he comes back to when he comes back to Japan either, he stays at their old
Yeah, and
clubhouse.
that's the thing, right? He's running away from his own grief and guilt, but that's his version of dealing of quotation marks dealing with it, and by that I mean suffering from it. But
He's throwing himself into as many experiences as
anything to
possible
distract
to
himself
run
from the
away.
pain, but he can't let it go, and the way you know that with him is because he keeps coming back to the secret base. That's where he stays when he's back in Japan. He he always comes back to that
And
spot.
also the revelation, like, from seeing his jobs and, like, hit seeing the jobs he does and later, like, how many different books he's reading at once to learn new skills and get better jobs, that he actually might be the hardest worker out of all of them, even more so than the prep kids. It's just so happens that he is throwing all of that work into supporting his ability to run away.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, part of that twisted dodecahedron of wannabe romances that has been messed up by all this jealousy and grief. He has a very different problem because
Yeah,
he
poor little Popo.
yeah, his guilt comes from the fact that he followed behind everyone because that's what he did back then, and he got he got there just in time to watch Menma die, and he couldn't make himself
Yep.
do anything about it. Not that he really could have anyway, but
Everyone else at least missed that, but Popo saw her body. The English one at least didn't make it entirely clear whether he saw her fall. It just said that he saw her floating down the river.
I
But,
think what
like,
he
either
says in the
way,
sub is something along the lines of, "I saw it happen, I watched her drifting away," or something along those lines, and he goes on to clarify that he still sees that moment all the time.
which explains why right away, more so than anyone else, he threw himself into believing it and wanting to help her right away because everybody else is guilty about what their feelings are or what their relationship with her was, or that they accidentally, like, instigated something that's not really their fault, but it feels like their fault. Whereas, like,
He's guilty because he stood there and watched, because that's what he did back
he
then, he watched. He couldn't move
well, and also, everyone just has their feelings to feel sad about. He saw her body.
and is haunted by it. Yeah. Christ, Popo.
Oh, his breakdown about it,
Yeah.
though. Chef's kiss. Of just, like, not only finally breaking down and crying, but just begging everyone else to keep helping her because he needs this.
Yeah, like, when they're all having their meltdowns near the end that they needed to have, he's basically saying, like, "It doesn't matter that if you have these, like, ulterior motives for doing this, we have to get her into heaven. I have to do something
We
to
have
help
to
her."
help her. I can't move on. I can't live like this.
It's fucking heartbreaking.
That's so bad.
Yeah, so we've got this group all in their different ways grieving over this girl's death and completely able to move on from it with all these feelings they had tied up in her life being warped by her death. And then we have the ghost herself who has popped back into existence with no memory really of what the afterlife was or anything like that. She knows she has a wish, she doesn't know what it is, and she just pops back into existence in Jinder's house, completely adrift in a world that has moved on without her, among friends who cannot. And she desperately wants to see her friends and her family, who we're going to touch on in a minute, heal and be better and be okay again because she wants desperately for them all to just be together because she's that fucking
And
wholesome.
because she wants nothing more to be a part of the group again.
Yeah. So she like she's the catalyst for bringing everyone back together because she so deeply wants everyone to be together. But she also knows that she has to move on, that she can't be a part of this. And despite having these very childlike mannerisms, in so many ways is the most emotionally mature one of them because she has understood that, and even though it hurts and makes her sad, some of these things, she is fine in the long run as long as the group doesn't fall apart. She's okay with it.
Yeah, all she
Except
cares about is the super peace busters.
so dumb. So, which is it's so good because it's so dumb. Uh,
It's a perfect little kids
yeah,
club name because it's
it's
yeah, wow,
completely
that sure does
meaningless.
sound cool and not mean anything at all.
The catch to this is, of course, that she has some very complicated feelings about her family because she stops by her old house where her family still live at one point and sees, like, oh god, it's not just my friends. My death has also completely done a number on my family.
Yeah, especially mom,
Yeah, her
who is not even living
yeah,
right now.
yeah, her mum is practically a ghost herself. She has been completely stuck in time, unable to move on, even holds a grudge against the surviving kids because their time wasn't frozen in her mind the way Menma's was. Like she is so out of it that at one point her son, who has grown up some and is still alive, basically says, "Do you know how tall I am?" Because she goes to talk to him and like kneels down like she would when he was like really young, and he's just looking clean over her head.
Yeah, it's also perfect it's perfect too because, like, he says a line earlier that, like, was voicing the exact thought I had where it's like, yeah, that's really, really sad that and I understand the pain she's going through, but he also sums it up perfectly to Jinta when he says, "You know, she has another kid."
Yeah.
And it's like, "Oh, oh, no, oh, man." It's like he hasn't even existed to his mom since his sister died.
Yeah, so she's in a loop of grief, unable to move on at all, to the point where she has completely lost touch of her son. He doesn't even factor in her mind. His dad isn't as badly caught in it, but he's distant, and he's that stern, distant, doesn't express emotions or anything kind of father figure. And he doesn't want to do anything that would cause himself or his family to remember and go through all that pain and grief again. So he's
He's only thinking of the pure practicality of don't bring on any more pain when than we're already in, not realizing that that's a trap
yeah, which
too.
is not helping him get over his grief. It's not helping his wife get over his grief. And the thing is, I can't remember his name, but Memma's younger brother, he was so little when she died that he barely even remembers her. All he really knows is that he's got a couple of fond memories, and that he feels abandoned in favor of this girl he barely even remembers. So they're not doing very well either. And poor Menma is like caught in the
Yeah.
middle of this, desperately not wanting to be forgotten, but also wanting everyone to just stop hurting and be okay again. Like one of the most tragic, painful scenes to watch is her saying to Jinta, like, one of the few times we see her genuinely angry and upset is when she discovers that he has been over at her family's house. And she's like, "You can't do
Yeah.
that. It makes them remember. It hurts them. What are you doing?"
They get sad when they think about me. How could you put them through that?
And ultimately, it's necessary. They have to think about her to finally properly grieve and get on with their lives.
It's the only way. You can never escape feelings. You can only process them, and if you don't, all you're doing is covering them up.
Yeah, like I said earlier on that this show is a fantastic example of Ghost as a manifestation of memory of things that happened in the past that people can't let go of. They are both physically haunting a character and also the metaphorical representation of the past that haunts them.
Yeah. Great portrayal of grieving too.
Exactly, that's exactly where I was about to go from that. And in that, and how the writing, how the story interacts with that concept, it ends up being such a raw and poignant and real portrayal of all the different ways people grieve or fail to grieve and the effect that has on them, on their relationships with each other. It is it is a beautiful commentary on the necessity of a proper healthy grieving process, and that you have to eventually let what you're grieving go, otherwise it is only going to hurt you more and more as time goes on. Because, like, as we've just
Yeah.
illustrated, Menma's death was an accident. It was a tragedy, but it was an accident, and all of these characters, all of her friends have all this guilt tied up in it, and as a result of that, all these other feelings that have been horribly distorted around the incident. Her family are in this unhealthy stasis that is leaving her brother just feeling so isolated and abandoned and alone at home. And even Menma herself, as sort of the ghost, as the onlooker character here, feels a degree of guilt because she's left them against her will, but also just is in so much pain seeing these people she care about stuck like this. It's god damn, this show is like just nailing, you know? It's
Yeah.
it can be genuinely painful to watch at times because of the emotions it depicts and how well it depicts them.
But eventually, bit by bit, everybody's feelings come out and we get everybody back together really working towards the goal of trying to grant her wish, not even realizing that in the process of doing that they already have.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, right? Is that it all comes back so naturally. All that negative stuff we talked about, but also all the good stuff. Jinta so naturally ends up slipping back into that leadership role Popo so naturally slips back into just going with the flow and being the funny guy, you know? And so on and so forth. Like, and one of my favorite things that this show does that I think you touched on a little bit, either earlier on or when we started talking before recording, uh, is
All
there is
right.
a really good representation of how the group dynamics are shifting because the names they call each other by change and shift depending upon how close they are to their old dynamic.
Yeah, they switch all 3 between each other's first names, last names, and their, nicknames as kids. Their Peace Buster names, you could say.
Yeah, because I mean, but for anyone who doesn't know, basically, the common courtesy in Japan is that if you're not very close to someone, I mean, other than the honorifics, you also call them by their family name. And then when you're, close, your friends, then you would start using actual given names and eventually nicknames. And they use that in this show to represent how close and positive the characters' relationships are towards each other. And by that I mean how close they are to where they used to be in the dynamic.
Yeah. Eventually, they all just start drifting back into their old nicknames until suddenly they realize they've been using them for a while.
Yeah, like, but one of the coolest things is like it's not just a gradual they slip into it, they sometimes slip back out of it when something comes up that throws a spanner in the works.
Yep.
But by the end of it, they are all using their old nicknames again, and they realize it, and they find it hilarious because they have this, like, simultaneous revelation, like, of, "Shit, we're right back where we started. We are the friend group again, and I don't know when it happens."
Yeah. I always find the name thing so funny too, 'cause the funny thing about the given name versus surname thing is it totally exists in plenty of Western places too. Like I know it's also absolutely a thing in America. All that changes is what the default is. Whereas here, the default basic thing, if you know someone like at all, is their first name to the point where instead using just someone's last name more comes off as an intentional display of distance.
Yeah,
Where it's like, "Oh, you only refer to someone by their last name? You must not like them at
maybe
all."
maybe it's just the autism, but I am terrible at knowing, like, when I am supposed to be using someone's first name or when it's more appropriate to, like, use their last name. I don't usually like, I usually just default to first names these days, but I distinctly remember, like, uh, y years back when I was still able to dance, I ended up becoming friends with someone who was actually the daughter of one of my old teachers. She started coming to the studio. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. I guess we're friends now." And I would be,
Mhm.
like, at their house talking to him, and I'd be like I would just immediately default back to his like, the way I addressed him when he was my teacher, because it was too weird to call him by his first name.
I mean, you had him as a teacher for so long, of course you did
Well,
that, like
1 year, then 2 years, sort of. I had him as my homeroom teacher 1 year, then not at all, and then he was my math teacher in year 9, but, it was yeah,
yeah.
it's weird. I don't I'm so out of the loop with that sort of thing. It's I some I look at the way it seems so clear cut in other cultures sometimes, I'm like, "Yeah, no, I get why you do it."
Yeah, it's kind of a safety feature. When formality is the default, you have a safety net.
Yeah.
Whereas, here, for the most part, it's the opposite. Formality I guess the best way I would put it is there you have to have you have to have a reason to break formality, whereas here, most of the time, you have to have an excuse to be formal or it looks weird.
Yeah. But yeah, speaking of formalities, I think we wouldn't be doing this right if we didn't address the one thing that is kind of irksome about AnoHana. So,
Yes.
it's not.
They even almost kind of they almost kind of even call it out a little bit at the end when they're like, "Wow, we could have spent a lot less time yelling at him and treating him like a liar if we had seen her float something
Yeah,
sooner."
so basically from the very beginning, the mechanics of Menma's ghostliness and how she interacts with the physical world, it's very unclear how it all works and what the limitations or anything actually are. Because as far as we can tell, the limitations, and these are the only limitations, is she cannot be heard by anyone or seen by anyone other than Jinta, and she can only communicate with people by riding on things that were her possession when she was alive.
Yeah, Jinta should have been way more scared. He didn't have a summer beast, he had a damn poltergeist.
Well, he could see her, so uh yeah, but by the same token, she can very much other than those limitations, she can completely physically interact with the world. She touches people all the time. They don't realize what's happening. It just gives them chills and makes them feel a weird weight on them where the contact is. But she is
She got
able to
steamed
physically
bread.
touch them. She makes puppets. She opens and closes doors. She showers. She makes bread and she eats.
Also, funny little note, you mentioned the chills. I actually think we also got a hint that Popo might be a little more spiritually inclined than everyone else because he's the only one who mentions
That's
chills.
true, actually.
Everyone else is just kinda like, "Huh, I feel a weight on me," or whatever, and every time she touches him, he goes, "Ugh."
That's true, actually. I hadn't even thought of that. That's interesting. But yeah, so she can physically interact with the world. She can visibly pick things up. She can cook. She can consume food. Fuck knows how that works. Uh,
Yeah, that was the thing that confused me the most. I was almost like, I wonder if maybe that's, like, the one thing that was fake, like, she's touching everything else and she can touch things, but maybe when she eats, she's feeling the experience of eating, but the food's not actually, getting eaten? I don't know.
it,
They don't show
they
it,
do though. We
but
do
that was
see
a
her.
thought.
Like she has those like what are they like pokey sticks or whatever they're called, and we see her very much eat one, start to finish.
Oh, yeah,
At least I think there's other
right.
instances too. So no idea how any of that works, and the show dances around this sort of fact that she is capable of doing this so much to the point that sometimes you do feel like characters are acting like idiots because a lot of the issue of is she really here or not from everyone else's perspectives other than Jinta's could so easily be solved by her just picking things up. And I don't want to call it a plot hole because it's not really, uh, but it is something of a
The only reason
contrivance.
it's not, though, is the only thing that stops it from being a legitimate plot hole. There's a lot of little things that help make it a little better, but honestly, the only thing that really makes it not a plot hole is the fact that Jinta wasn't really trying. Because he would have to be really dumb not to ever even think for a second when he sees people reacting to her
Oh
touching
yeah,
them and sees her moving objects to not just be like, "Wait,
yeah,
what if I just showed them?"
yeah. Like to be clear, though, like it's not a plot hole because it doesn't. It's not something that breaks the plot if you think about it. But it is a contrivance. They have to go out of their way to dance around this issue and not make use of it. Uh, and it's the one thing that irks me about this show because I love this show. It's so good. The way it handles the emotional writing and just the general narrative is fantastic, and the character writing, chef's kiss. But this one thing does irk me, but it is as you say. The show lampshades it near the end. Like they are aware that they've done it clearly because they do lampshade it because someone does sort of go, you know, if you had just done this from the beginning, it would have cut a lot of our struggles out, and we could have just gotten to this. And they kind of just blame it on the fact that Nenma is very scatterbrained and airhead and kind of just an idiot.
Whereas we know as viewers, it's just because all that stuff needed to happen. They had to go through all
Yeah.
that.
For it to be interesting and worth watching. and
and for them to heal.
for them to heal, of course. And Jinta being sort of careless and out of it is a factor in their mind. But of course, the reality is, of course, that it's selfishness on his part. He's really not trying that hard to help them communicate with her because in his mind everything is okay as long as she just stays with him again. So you can understand why he hasn't facilitated these interactions even if the idea may have even occurred to him earlier.
Yeah, and, like, it part of his breakdown comes from realizing that that's selfish, not just because he wants to not just because everyone else would wanna see her and spend time with her too, but also because just because he's her favorite and she loves him doesn't, like, mean she doesn't need other people. She wants to be together with everybody, not just with him.
Yeah, yeah, that's a hard pill for him to swallow. But yeah, so there is that one irksome thing that it doesn't really hurt the show. Like it's still a very good watch. It's still a wonderful story. But once you notice it, and we've done this too now, I'm so sorry. But once you notice it, it will, unless you can switch that part of your brain off, it is going to just needle at you sometimes. And there, even though there is justification for it, there is Menma being daft and Jinta being selfish. So there is some justification for why it was done that definitely softens that needling, that blow a little bit. But it's the one
But
thing that
it's
I
still
think they
gonna
could
be
have done
poking at
better.
your suspension of
Yeah.
disbelief.
No, it's not gonna break it. It's not gonna like. It's not even a particularly hard kick necessarily, but the fourth wall quivers every now and then.
It's Menma. She's sitting there next to your fourth wall suspension of disbelief going poke, 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 poke.
But yeah, it's the one thing. But by and large, it wouldn't be right. I feel like we wouldn't be doing our job here right if we didn't address the flaws as well, no matter how much we like the story we're talking about. But ultimately, it is a very good story. It is one of the best portrayals of grief and different kinds of grief that I have ever seen in media. Maybe even the best. It is
Yeah, and,
so
like,
good.
I if anybody who is listening to this has not watched it yet, first of all, half sorry for the spoilers, half what's wrong with you, you should have gone and watched it.
I
Um,
don't see. I don't
but,
think the spoilers really take away that much.
they don't, and that's why I was gonna say, even if you have spoilers, and before we finish, I have a little bit to say about the ending, since
Oh,
it is,
please go.
as in
Yeah.
any good story like this, the hardest hitting part of the
Oh
whole
yeah. If you
thing.
if
I
yeah,
cried.
if you watch if you watch the game of hide and seek and feel nothing, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, if you like, if you if you are interested in this, but not entirely sold yet, watch it, even if it's just to treat everything else you watch as setup so that the ending can hit you as hard directly in the heart as possible, because it is one of the strongest, most raw emotional feelings I've ever seen. And like so many good stories, not entirely, but in a small way, it ends where it began, with a game of hide and seek.
And saying goodbye to Menma.
Yeah, but, like, it's really good. And personal bit of advice here, it's not what I used this show for because I went through my process a while ago, but I can speak from experience that stories like this are also a great way to try to break the dam. If you have something you're going through or grieving for, especially the loss of someone that you can't get over, the dam just won't break, even though you're sad and upset and you feel bad and you acknowledge that it's not coming out and flowing freely. Throwing yourself into a story like this is a great way to do it. Like, speaking from personal experience for a second, for the longest time after my dad died, I literally had the thought that I wanted to cry over him and I couldn't, until I watched not this, but, Violet Evergarden. Won't get into that whole thing, but I had heard about it being a tearjerker, and I was like, "Well, alright, well, why don't I try throwing myself as emotionally and fully into something as possible? I've never done that before." And I got to the part where you're supposed to cry, one of many parts where you're supposed to cry, and I finally cried, and once I cried for that while actively trying to, then I found I could cry about other things, and I started to feel better.
I mean, that's literally in this show, that is literally Jinta's entire journey.
That's a nice touch we get at the end, which is also like, of course Menma came back for that. She wouldn't have come back for herself because she was never a selfish enough person to do something like that. Because this whole time, the wish wasn't hers. It was Jinta's mom.
Yeah,
A short while before she died, Menma talked to her, and she saw what her son was going through with her being sick, and she knew about his tendency to run away from everything and was experiencing it with him even running away from her while she was on her hospital bed, and she acknowledged she wanted him to feel everything, and even though she the last thing she would ever want is for him to be upset, she knew that he needed to cry, he needed to face and feel his pain, and
process it.
that's what she
Yeah.
asked Menma to do, which, you know, little did Menma know that, she was gonna need to grant that request for her mom and herself, but
Yeah. For, it's a surprisingly heavy show. Like, the first opening, like, the first, like, 5 mi or so minutes, you could be forgiven for thinking this is gonna be a silly comedy about being haunted. But no, it is one of the heaviest dramas I have ever watched, and I love it for that.
yeah, I absolutely love it. It's a story that's about grieving, but I almost feel like more than grieving, it's almost a story about the grief itself because, I mean, obviously, it's kind of the same thing, but not entirely. We all know, grieving is a part of the healing process, and, like, I almost wanna call this not just a grief story, but almost like a post-tragedy, but, like, in the actual classical sense of a tragedy, Shakespearean, because in ways, with all the drama and the stuck feelings and everything everybody was going through and the timing, narratively, Menma's death kinda fits a Shakespearean tragedy, but on a much
Really doing the
smaller,
Greeks
more
dirty on that one,
neighborhood
but yeah.
scale. Or sorry, Greek tragedy, true. It is more of a Greek tragedy than a Shakespearean one really anyways, because 'cause they're also not exactly the same. Um,
But yeah,
besides the fact that the one was a lot longer ago,
it's
but this is the follow-up to a
yeah,
tragedy. The tragedy already happened when the story started. We're seeing the damage and the healing.
yeah, it's a story about the aftermath, and it's I mean, I've said it like 50 times already. I love this show. Like, even
It's
with that
really
little
good.
niggling flaw, like, every time I watch it, at the end of it, I just have to sit there for a couple minutes and process it. Because, I mean, obviously, the things it brings to mind for me aren't necessarily the same that it brings to mind for John, but there are definitely things that makes me think about too. That
Yeah,
I am not getting into on the internet with a bunch of faceless listeners. But it just hits all those emotional beats. It is so well done in that emotional narrative and in the way it uses a ghost in that way of the manifestation of all those feelings, all those connections to the past. And I'm very glad that I locked John into doing this one before he even got a say in it because I mentioned it in the previous episode before getting the okay.
I enjoyed it a whole lot. It's the least ghost story feeling ghost story I've ever seen, and that's a good thing.
Uh, however, until then, we will leave it there because we've been going for a bit. So if you're listening to this over on Spotify or YouTube or somewhere else, I also put these episodes up on my website, radfordwrites.com. You can also find the various stories I write, primarily the ones for this podcast, but other things as well on that site, as well as blog articles and things like that, and you can also buy my books through the site. Please do that. Any support I very much appreciate. Makes it easy to keep writing more of them. And of course, you can find John on Twitch and YouTube as Sephir, Sephear.
Yeah, you should consume our content. It's good for the soul, and it won't make you cry most of the time.
Mine might.
Sometimes it will.
The
His
high
might.
high chance mine will actually. I don't know. I don't tend to write the happiest stories, but until then,
It'll only make you cry when and because it's good.
yeah, that. But yes, until then,
Got
we
him.
will see you guys next time. Thank you for listening, and thank you for finding us.
Doodles.